right, welcome to your A-level revision explainer on utilitarianism. If you're getting prepped for your religious studies exam, then you are definitely in the right place. We are about to break down everything you need to know, from the core ideas to the critical arguments that are going to help you get those top marks. So let's get right into it. So here's our game plan. We're going to cover 4 key areas. First, we'll get to grips with that core principle of the greatest good. Then, we'll look at how Jeremy Bentham tried to literally calculate happiness. After that, we'll see how John Stuart Mill came along and tried to upgrade the theory. And finally, we'll put it all to the test and ask, does it actually work? Honestly, you can think of this as the perfect structure for your next essay. Okay, to kick things off, let's look at a real classic, the trolley problem. You know the one. A train is about to hit 5 people. You can pull a lever to switch the tracks, but if you do, it'll hit 1 person instead. So what's the right thing to do? This whole dilemma cuts right to the very heart of utilitarianism, because it forces us to ask that fundamental question: should we judge our actions based purely on their consequences? Right then, let's get into our first section, the greatest good. This is your essential A01 knowledge. This is the foundation that everything else we talk about is going to be built on, so pay close attention.
The first key term you've absolutely got to get your head around is teleological. Now, it sounds complicated, but it's really not. It just means that for this ethical theory, the morality of an action is all about its outcome. It's all about the consequences. For a utilitarian, the ends justify the means. So forget strict rules. What matters is what happens because of your actions.
And this is the principle that guides everything. If there's one phrase you remember from this whole explainer, make it this one: the greatest good for the greatest number. This is the North Star for any utilitarian. Every single decision should aim to maximize happiness or good for the biggest possible number of people. Simple as that. Okay, so how do we actually figure out what the greatest good is in any given situation? Well, this brings us to our first major thinker, Jeremy Bentham. He basically tried to turn morality into a kind of maths. Bentham kicks things off with this really bold claim about what makes us tick. He says we're all ruled by 2 sovereign masters, pleasure and pain. Everything we do, every single day, is about chasing pleasure and running away from pain. And for him, this wasn't just some random observation, it was the solid foundation for his entire ethical system. If pleasure is what we all want, then good is simply pleasure and bad is simply pain. It's that straightforward. So based on that idea, Bentham created a tool he called the hedonic calculus. The best way to think about it is like a moral calculator. As the scales here suggest, the whole point is to weigh up the potential pleasure an action might cause against the potential pain. It's an attempt to make ethics scientific. And here are the 7 factors that go into his calculation. It's like a checklist for any moral choice. You have to ask: intensity, how strong is the pleasure going to be? Duration, how long will it last? Certainty, how sure are we that it will even happen? Propinquity, that's a fancy word for how soon it will happen. Fecundity, will it lead to even more pleasure down the line? Purity, is it going to be just pleasure or will there be some pain mixed in? And finally, the big one, extent, how many people are going to feel it? But as you can probably guess, trying to turn morality into simple maths, well, it had some pretty big problems. So let's move on and see how our next key thinker, John Stuart Mill, came along and tried to fix it. Right, one of the biggest criticisms thrown at Bentham's theory was that it was a swine ethic, a philosophy fit for pigs. The argument was that by treating all pleasures as equal, you're putting the simple animalistic pleasures on the same level as the most noble human ones. Bentham himself famously said a simple pub game was as good as poetry if they both produced the same amount of pleasure. And for a lot of people, that just felt wrong. And this is where Mill comes in and totally changes the game. He shifted the focus from the quantity of pleasure to its quality. So while Bentham was all about just adding up units of pleasure, Mill said, hang on, we have to think about the kind of pleasure. He created this hierarchy. You've got higher pleasures, the pleasures of the mind, like art, philosophy, and learning. And then you've got lower pleasures, the pleasures of the body, like eating, drinking, and just lazing around. And this quote for Mill, it's just brilliant. It sums up his entire argument perfectly. He's basically saying that the rich, complex, intellectual life of a human, even if it comes with struggles and dissatisfaction, is infinitely more valuable than the simple, happy-go-lucky life of a pig. Higher pleasures are just better, full stop. This whole distinction also gives us 2 different flavors of utilitarianism. Bentham's way of thinking is called act utilitarianism. That's where you apply the calculus to every single action every single time. Mill's approach, on the other hand, is closer to rule utilitarianism. This suggests that instead of calculating every little thing, we should follow general rules that, over time, tend to produce the greatest good. Rules like don't lie or don't steal. It's just a more practical way to live.
Okay, we've got the key ideas down. Now for the part that really gets you the big marks in an exam, the AO2 evaluation. Let's start weighing up the strengths and weaknesses and see if this whole theory actually holds up under pressure. So let's put it on the scales. On the plus side, it's secular, right? It doesn't rely on any religious belief, which is a big deal. It's democratic, everyone's happiness counts equally, and its goal is happiness, something we can all pretty much agree is a good thing. But then you've got the weaknesses, and they are significant. I mean, can we really predict the consequences of our actions? Doesn't it just steamroll the rights of individuals? And maybe the biggest one, is it even possible to measure something as personal as happiness? Let's dig into what is probably the biggest, most damaging criticism, the tyranny of the majority. Think about it. If morality is just about getting the greatest good for the greatest number, what stops a huge majority from doing something awful to a small minority if it makes the majority happy? This is a massive challenge to the theory because it seems to completely ignore our ideas of justice, fairness, and individual rights. And here's that other huge practical problem. How on earth do you actually measure pleasure? We don't have universal units for happiness, like we have grams for weight or meters for distance. The joy someone gets from reading a book is totally different to the thrill of winning a football match. How can we possibly compare those two things and add them up in any meaningful, objective way? It seems almost impossible. Now for a brilliant thought experiment from the philosopher Robert Nozick. He asks you to imagine a machine that you could plug into for the rest of your life. This machine would give you any experience you wanted. It would feel completely real, and you'd have perfect, unending pleasure. Now, a hardcore utilitarian should say, yes, sign me up. But Nozick argues that most of us would say no. Why? Because we value real life, real achievements, and real relationships, not just the fake feeling of pleasure. This really challenges that core idea that pleasure is the only thing that matters. And here's one more that really hits hard, this one from Bernard Williams. Imagine a man named Jim finds himself in a village where 10 innocent people are about to be executed. The captain says to Jim, if you kill one of them yourself, I'll let the other 9 go free. If Jim refuses, the captain will kill all 10. Now, a pure utilitarian calculation says Jim should kill the one to save the 9. But Williams argues this totally ignores our sense of personal integrity. It makes us responsible for performing a horrific act, even if it's for a greater good. But hey, let's not just tear the theory apart. For a balanced essay, you've got to remember the strengths. So to recap, it's a secular theory which is really useful in a world with lots of different beliefs. It's democratic, at least in principle, because everyone's happiness gets a vote, and it's pragmatic. It gives you a clear method, the utility principle, to try and solve real-world moral problems. So as we wrap things up, here it is, your essential revision checklist. These are the absolute must-knows. Make sure you can explain Bentham and his hedonic calculus, Mill's crucial idea about higher and lower pleasures, the difference between act and rule, and be ready to use that powerful criticism about the tyranny of the majority. If you've got those down, you're in a great position. And that leaves us with the final big question, the one you need to form an opinion on for your own essays. Is this whole principle of achieving the greatest happiness for the greatest number a sensible, practical guide for how we should live? Or, by ignoring things like rights, justice, and our own moral integrity, is it actually a really dangerous idea? That's for you to decide.